Hello, my name is James Riedy, and this is my discussion board topic number 2, my current research interests. I chose for my paper by Dexheimer, reaction time asymmetries provide insight into mechanisms underlying dominant and non-dominant hand selections. This article was written in the past 5 years, and it references and cites several other articles written in the past 5 years. So first off, what does it mean for the kinesiology community? Dexheimer's research helps PTs in the clinic train cardiovascular and stroke survivor patients relearn motor correlates and functional tasks such as reach and grasp, apprehension, and hand dominance can often play a role in recovery depending on where the lesion or where the stroke occurred and what type of stroke, whether it was ischemic or hemorrhagic. And we'll see different recovery times and different approaches depending on the location of the impairment when we're retraining the motor skills and tasks, knowing that the motor and brain correlates often overlap. Dexheimer also quotes and cites Sandberg and colleagues, which another article from 2017, and they came to a very interesting conclusion that the dominant limb is best equipped for reaches that require specific trajectories and accuracy, while non-dominant, which for most Americans, about 90%, are right-handed, so non-dominant is the left arm, is better at endpoint accuracy and positioning. In other words, non-pre-planned movement patterns. So within that literature, considering Sandberg, Dexheimer, and Orban et al., a lot of research has looked at externally cued action selection, choice involved with the execution of reaching tasks, but not a lot of studies have looked at internally cued choice or action selection tasks. So that begs the question then, should we look at internal cues? When we think about extracted planning or pre-planning periods, when looking at trajectories and movement speed, velocity, acceleration, oftentimes those are considered performance variables, and reach control and our understanding of the smoothing of trajectories and other performance variables are usually extracted from the trajectory data and those kinematic measures. And that may be the best way to study it for right now, but hopefully in future we'll have better understanding of what's actually happening at the brain so we can better train and retrain stroke and cardiovascular patients with respect to the reach and grasp. So this is a figure that I actually created. This would be an example of a research study that could fill the gap. So this is an example of the type of trajectories that we could reach for. 45-degree angle is often what we find in everyday functional activities. A 14-centimeter reach is fully within most arm lengths, and 5 centimeter targets are very, very common in this kind of research for visual cueing. So that would be, again, externally cued, but where the internal cues come into play is the action selection. Non-dominant hands. Secondary variables would be for planning peak acceleration, and for performance peak velocity or hand path ratios, which is really simple to discern from the data. So I actually looked at this a little bit in my master's, though I didn't get very far with this specific topic. So I ran some trials on healthy individuals, college age participants, and what we found were between left or right trajectories. In other words, reaching with the right arm to the left, how was the trajectory? Was it smooth? You can see in 101 the action selection left trajectory, so reaching to the left with the right hand in healthy people, college age. A lot of times they made mistakes and reached to the right because they were cued incorrectly or they misunderstood the cue. And then we see for the action selection, reaching to the right with the right hand, that was much more smooth, a lot fewer errors. With execution only, very, very simple, no choice, 100% accuracy, reaching to the left with the right arm, so that's across midline. And then right hand dominant people, reaching to the right, even smoother, but we see that little hook at the end because they actually overreach, which is fascinating with right hand dominant people. Now, reaching with the left arm, this is again with right hand dominant people, we see that when there's a choice, so a more complex task, people reaching with the non-dominant left hand to the left, they still make a ton of errors. Reaching with choice to the right across midline with their non-dominant left hand, they make more mistakes than before than with the right hand because there's less of a pre-planned ability, but they're a little bit smoother. And then we see execution only, simple, 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 lifting and reaching with the non-dominant left hand to the left, pretty accurate, but you'll notice the variability is kind of wide. Reaching across midline, which would be more complex of a motor task, execution only though, so no brain correlates. A little bit smoother, but again, a little bit of an overreach sensor. Students. And then we see very, very similar patterns in the non-dominant left hand. So those were the research questions that always come to mind whenever I read Dexheimer's research. Obviously, I assumed that there would be a difference in between right hand and left hand in right hand dominant folks. I assumed that action selection would add complexity and that would change the trajectories in movement and velocity in particular. And now an example research question and a short abstract that I would write. So to determine the effects of adding additional action selection choice demands to a performance of a skilled reach and grasp task to two targets within a virtual environment, that just helps with when we extrapolate this to non-healthy folks, so people in the clinic, so that we can standardize the test. So the research question: if planning specification is completed in parallel, plans for both reaches plan simultaneously, the addition of planning demands, action selection, would not affect reach performance, such as velocity, trajectory, acceleration. If planning is not completed in parallel, the addition of planning demands, through action selection, may affect reach performance, movement, acceleration, velocity, trajectory, suggesting that a default reach plan is generated. That would be my research question and assumption. So this is what a possible abstract would read like. A well-studied model of cognitive motor function is a process of action selection. It is unclear how the planning demands of a reach movement interact with the added complexity of selection. Therefore, this dissertation question will investigate the effect of adding selection demands to the performance of skilled reaches within a virtual environment. So I gave the example of 30 young healthy participants reaching with their dominant right hand or their non-dominant left hand. And I gave the two conditions, defined those two conditions for ipsilateral and contralateral reaches, and broke that down into z-scores and the p-values, for example, of what I would assume based off of what I kind of saw in undergrad and grad school. Reaction times for the AS condition, I assume, would be significantly longer than for execution only. The primary measures of reach performance, movement time, and endpoint error may not differ between the conditions, which is kind of what we see in the preliminary data that I saw in my previous studies. And basically, the summary would find that the action selection condition affected the performance variables significantly, but did not affect the secondary variables. And hopefully, this kind of question would help therapists in the clinic, help patients with stroke recovery, relearning, reach and grasp tasks, and also if they've ever had like heart attacks or heart attack episodes and somehow have lost, either through hemiparesis, some sort of function or smoothing ability to their trajectories or reaching ability. So any questions beyond that? I'll continue to vacillate on this topic because it's very, very interesting to me. And here are my references. Thank you.